Hello, I'm Ed Hardy, President of Yosemite Park and Curry Company. In the next hour, you'll be taken on a video journey through Yosemite, which is celebrating 100 years as a national park. What you will see and experience is almost exactly what visitors to this great park saw 100 years ago. In some areas, even better. When Yosemite was established as a national park in 1890, an effort was begun to preserve the land in its natural state for the enjoyment of future generations. Today, the National Park Service, part of the United States Department of the Interior, is assigned these responsibilities. And Yosemite Park and Curry Company is the principal concessionaire in Yosemite National Park. The Curry Company has provided guest services such as hotels, restaurants, guided tours, and recreational services in the park for over 90 years. We are very proud of the environmental record achieved in Yosemite in recent years. The National Park Service and the Curry Company have been at the forefront of recycling, restoration of wildlife and meadows, and environmental advocacy in many ways. The Curry Company is the only company to have won both the United States and California's Take Pride in America award. Each of these actions, and many more, have served to preserve the park and protect it for enjoyment of future generations. Ansel Adams, the great Yosemite photographer, said shortly before he passed away in 1984 that Yosemite is better cared for today than he remembers it was when he first arrived. Although when you see Yosemite through the eyes of this video, you will see the beauty and power of Yosemite as it was 100 years ago, as it is today, and as it will be 100 years from now. Let me once again say how proud I am to be involved in this landmark centennial celebration. I hope that you are able to share in experiencing the grandeur of Yosemite National Park during the park's 100th anniversary.
The mighty Sierra, so gloriously colored and so radiant, it seemed not clothed with light, but wholly composed of it, like the wall of some celestial city. Then it seemed to me that the Sierra should be called the range of light.
A Scotsman's restless search for an elusive quality of wildness ended in the heart of the range, a valley called Yosemite, in the spring of 1868.
Every rock in its granite walls seemed to glow with life. Some leaned back in majestic repose. Others advanced beyond their companions in thoughtful attitudes, seemingly aware, yet heedless of everything going on about them.
The first view of the valley, he said, is a revelation that enriches one's life forever.
Lofty wilds enlivened and made glorious with rejoicing streams that come chanting in chorus over the cliffs and through side canyons to join the river that flows in tranquil, shining beauty.
In this one mountain mansion, nature had gathered her choicest treasures.
Myriads of small winged creatures, birds, bees, butterflies, give glad animation and help make all the air into music.
The words of John Muir, a paean to rock, water, and the very air itself, words that have echoed through the century, and with caring and understanding may be heard in the hearts of all who see and experience Yosemite. Since 1851, when first entered by non-Indians, Yosemite has been a magnet to millions of visitors who have tried to capture its glory in words, on canvas, and film. Inspiration Point was famous as a place where all tourists arriving from the south had their first view of the valley. For centuries, its river-threaded floor of meadows and forests, peace and beauty, was a tranquil home to wildlife and Native Americans. Experts estimate that Native Americans were living in the valley as long ago as 3,000 to 4,000 years. The Awanichi, a small tribe of Miwoks, settled there about 800 years ago. Few traces of their long tenure in the valley remain, but the memory lives on in the Indian village, where interpretation of their culture is provided by Indian cultural demonstrators of the National Park Service. They had names for their land. Pohono, probably meaning blast of wind, and Tisiak, a reference to an ancient Indian legend. The valley appeared to be shaped like a mouth, and they called it Awani, from the Indian word for mouth. It was gold that resulted in the March 1851 discovery of the valley that was to become as precious as gold for its scenic splendor. The influx of miners into the surrounding countryside disrupted the lifestyle of the Miwoks. Some retaliated with raids on the miners. After a raid on 2 of his stores, James Savage helped organize the Mariposa Battalion, a band of 200 volunteers. In March 1851, they marched into the mountains to round up all the Indians and take them to the Fresno River Reservation. Most of the Indians fled before reaching the reservation. Only a few returned to live in their valley. Although the battalion failed in its purpose, one of its companies succeeded in entering, exploring, and naming the Great Valley. Under the mistaken assumption that the Indians called it Yosemite, Lafayette Bunnell, the company's young medic, named it Yosemite Valley. Almost on the heels of the departing Indian people came a handful of tourists trekking in over dim trails, eager to see if the reported cliffs and waterfalls were as sky-reaching as rumored. More soon followed. An English journalist, James Hutchings, was among the first to arrive in 1855. With him was artist Thomas Ayers. Through their representation of Yosemite's natural wonders, the valley was introduced to the traveling public. 9 years later, Hutchings returned to the valley. He was associated with its settlement, development, and politics until his death 48 years later. Galen Clark, a member of another 1855 party, was eventually appointed guardian of the new state park, a position he held intermittently for 23 years. Clark located and explored 2 groves of giant sequoia, which he named and publicized as the Mariposa Grove. As he guided influential people through the groves and told them of the further wonders in Yosemite Valley, he stressed the need for its protection.
There were a number of people who were important in helping determine what Yosemite National Park would become. People such as Frederick Law Olmsted and Galen Clark, who were instrumental in the enactment of the Yosemite Grant, that 1864 legislation that set aside Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove. In that year, Congress took time from its activities associated with the Civil War to set aside Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias, located now within the southern boundary of Yosemite National Park, to be administered by the state of California for public resort and recreation. These 2 tracts of land were not established as a national park as such at that time, but that did mark the first time that land was set aside to be held in public trust, simply because it was beautiful.
Eight years later, Yellowstone was created as America's first designated national park. But the precedent, the pioneer preservationist example, was the Yosemite Grant. It was indeed a milestone. A few pioneers lost their homestead claims under the Yosemite Grant, but some were satisfied to stay and pay small concession fees for the privilege of operating businesses in and above the valley to serve the needs of the visiting public. But visitor needs and desires were altering the very environment that made Yosemite a world wonder. This was the valley scene that John Muir gazed upon. John Muir, Scotland's gift to America, wanderer, inventor, poet, botanist. Escaping the harsh bonds of a puritanical upbringing, receiving a joyous baptism in wild nature, he recorded a testimony of love for Yosemite, an interpretation of nature inspired by essayists Henry Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson.
The longer we gazed, the more we admired not only their colossal size, but their majestic beauty and dignity, greatest of all trees, greatest of all living things.
In the high Tuolumne Meadows, after tramping behind 2,000 sheep as they ate their way up from the foothills, the 32-year-old wanderer's life work became clear.
The harm they do goes to the heart. To let sheep trample so divinely a place seems barbarous.
He fixed his eyes on Sierra peaks.
A grand Sierra cathedral, a building of one stone hewn from the living rock, with sides, roof, gable, spire, and ornamental pinnacles, fashioned symmetrically, like a work of art.
The study of glaciers and their labors in smoothing and shaping the unique rock sculpture became another goal. But bread, perishable bread, is the tie to civilization. Muir's inventive talent was useful in the valley. Hutchings needed a sawyer to make lumber to expand his hotel. In 1869, Muir began his 5-year residency in the valley. After 1874, John Muir was lured away to further explorations and to marry and raise a family. Yet Yosemite remained his passion. This landscape of wonders that attracts more than 3 million visitors a year recorded a total visitation of fewer than 3,000 between 1855 and 1868. In 1885, 4 years before John Muir's return, there were 2,590. Muir decried what was happening to his beloved valley. Meadows plowed for hay and grain, fences, barnyard animals, frontier structures, and worse, the hoofed locusts were devouring the fragile high country meadows. But Muir had become a noted preservationist, undertaking a campaign to make the high country surrounding Yosemite Valley a national park. His efforts were rewarded only 13 months later. On October 1st, 1890, President Benjamin Harrison signed into law an act reserving 1,512 square miles of reserved forest land, later called Yosemite National Park. As in Yellowstone National Park, units of United States Army cavalrymen were assigned as caretakers. Their accomplishments were of immense benefit, but conflict with the state administration of the Yosemite grant was inevitable. For example, soldiers could disarm hunters, yet valley residents were allowed the use of firearms. When it became apparent that only a federal administration could assure a truly protected park system, John Muir led the battle to reseed the Yosemite grant to the federal government.
The big tree is nature's forest masterpiece. Any fool can destroy trees. They cannot run away. God has cared for these trees, but he cannot save them from fools. Only Uncle Sam can do that.
He enlisted the aid of the Sierra Club, which he helped found in 1892, and persuasively presented the case for conservation of America's wilderness areas to President Theodore Roosevelt in May 1903. On June 11, 1906, President Roosevelt signed into existence the Acceptance Bill, which made Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove a part of Yosemite National Park.
By 1912, though, it was becoming apparent that a central authority was needed to govern what was then becoming a growing system of parks and monuments. Finally, in 1916, Congress established the National Park Service as the agency to administer places such as this. And this new bureau was charged, in the terms of the act, to conserve the scenery, the natural and historic objects, and the wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. Basically, then, the National Park Service has a dual purpose: to preserve resources and at the same time to make them available for public use and enjoyment. That dual mission was shaped to a great extent by the early history of parks such as Yosemite.
Yosemite's earlier history, the sculpting of its unique granite landforms by river and ice, commenced distant millenniums ago. But it was a series of glaciations beginning about 2 million years ago that shaped the park as we see it today. In the shadows of Mount Lyell, a center from which the glaciers descended, are new ice bodies formed since the last ice age. John Muir was the first to discover these and was among the first to recognize that glaciers were the force primarily responsible for Yosemite's topography. "15 million years ago, streams wandered through broad valleys amid rolling hills. 10 million years ago, uplift of the range steepened stream gradients. The ancient Merced River became a torrent, eroding the hills and incising a deep V-shaped valley. Glaciers born during centuries of heavy snows and persistently cold climates descended into the valley, filling it to varying depths. The glacier's gouging action widened and deepened the canyon. Tributary streams now fell from sheer cliffs. Ancient Lake Yosemite was formed by the melting of the last glacier. The lake, filling with silt, became a marsh, and eventually the valley floor as it is today. In the High Sierra, sediments were stripped away. Boulders called erratics were carried and dropped as the ice ground and polished the barren rock. Tenaya Lake, named after Miwok leader Chief Tenaya, was gouged by a branch of the Tuolumne Glacier. It is gradually filling with silt and will eventually disappear. Mirror Lake, just above the head of Yosemite Valley, reflects the sources of its creation. Rock falls blocked Tenaya Creek and formed the little body of tranquil waters. Old Lake Yosemite, now the level valley floor along which flows the Merced River, was given its space when the powerful glaciers plowed nearly half a mile deep into the granite below. John Muir, perhaps reflecting on their activity upon the valley walls, commented that the life of a glacier is one eternal grind. The distinctive features of the valley's landmarks were determined by fracturing or jointing of the granite and were modified by the massive impact of the ice. El Capitan, fully 3,500 feet above the valley floor, is the largest single granite rock in the world. Only 20% of Half Dome was cut away by glaciers. This symbol of Yosemite has no counterpart in the world. Domes are rare, and one with a part so cleanly missing is rarer still. The dome's rounded summit, 4,800 feet above the valley floor, has been standing for as long as 10 million years. Domes are formed by internal pressures pushing upward against types of granite with unusually few internal cracks. Layers are loosened, and over time, irregularities are eliminated, and the dome becomes smoother and more rounded. The Grand Canyon of the Tuolumne retained the characteristic V shape of a valley. Glaciers cannot dislodge solid granite monoliths. They can only grind and polish the rock. The display of awesome power, the beauty, the mystic and magnetic attraction of thundering, falling water. It is the waterfalls leaping from rare heights and plummeting down incomparable rock formations that have made Yosemite world-renowned. Yosemite Falls, at 2,425 feet, is one of the highest in the world. The lower fall drops a mere 320 feet, yet it is twice as high as Niagara. Bridal Veil Fall is a classic example of a free-leaping waterfall. Dropping 620 feet from the lip of a precipice, it dissolves into rain and clouds of misty spray below. Springing from fountains of melting ice and snow in the height of the flood season, the waterfalls are graceful visitors, keeping pace with the ebb and flow of nature, changing with the seasons. The Sierra Nevada mountain range is one of the fastest growing on Earth, rising an inch per year. Yet erosion will outpace uplift, and in an unimaginable future, the Sierra will again be reduced to rolling upland. But nature's grand show is eternal, said John Muir. Observe with his eyes and in his words, listen to the enchantment that is Yosemite. In the midst of such scenery, the day seems endless. The sun stands still. Here you may learn that this miracle occurs for every devout mountaineer, for everybody doing anything worth doing, seeing anything worth seeing. One day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years as one day. Autumn tints kindle and burn over meadow and grove. Mellow sunshine overhead, cool shadows beneath. The light filtered and strained like that which passes through colored windows. The whole valley is a mosaic of greens and purples, yellows and reds. skies are these rocks and waters arrayed in storm robes, the clouds in whose depths the frail snowflowers grow. Lofty headlands, awful in stern, immovable majesty, how softly these rocks are adorned, while snow and winds and clouds sing and wreathe about them. The thunder of falling ice, cracked off by the sunbeams, awakening all the valley. The glorious brightness of frosty mornings, kindling marvelous iris fires. These vast, calm, measureless mountain days, in whose light everything seems equally divine, opening 1,000 windows to show us God. This, said John Muir, is a tree lover's paradise. Each of Yosemite's 27 varieties of trees has charm, beauty, and purpose. Roots retain water and forestall erosion. Seeds, acorns, and insects are the staff of life for the birds that inhabit their branches. But it is the massive, towering sequoia, vibrant with growth, a living being, that is one of the wonders of the world, the largest living thing on Earth. 1,000,000 centuries ago, the sequoia grew tall in widespread forests. Their ancestors gave shade to dinosaurs. Here, in isolated groves along the western slope of the Sierra, the great trees have made their last stand. 3 small groves are protected within Yosemite's boundaries. In the coming centuries, which will survive? The billions of members of the human race, or the last fragile stands of the giant sequoia? Their species is a rarity. Their size dwarfs us. Their age is venerable. The grizzly giant approaching 3,000 years of age, 40 human lifetimes, sprouted when humans had barely learned the meaning of civilization. Life begins in a tiny seed. The mortality rate of young seedlings is high until about 400 years of age. Mature trees are scarred from the fires of 100, 1,000 years ago. Cleansing the forest floor, purifying the soil, fire aids in the tree's reproduction. Hot, drying air rises and opens seed cones. The shower of seeds then falls on the seedbed provided by the fire. The period of fire suppression, thought to be beneficial to preserving the trees, proved injurious. It allowed undergrowth to become dense, increasing fire danger and preventing sequoia seeds from falling to mineral soil. In recent years, the Park Service has initiated a program of prescription burning to simulate the natural process that plays a vital role in forest ecology. In another of nature's paradoxes, the life continuancy of this mammoth tree is aided by a minute creature of the forest that feeds on the cones and lets the seeds fall to the ground, the Douglas squirrel. John Muir had a warm regard for wildlife as fellow creatures.
A multitude of animal people intimately related to us, but of whose life we know almost nothing, are as busy about their own affairs as we are about ours.
In an unenlightened age, feeding the wildlife was a popular pastime. But all park animals are wild. Attempting to feed them can prove injurious to the health of both animal and human. Yosemite's bears are the black bear. Their lazy appearance belies formidable strength and power. Bears are highly intelligent and easily conditioned to accepting human food. Bear-proof garbage cans, dumpsters, and metal lockers have been installed by Yosemite Park and Curry Company and the Park Service. Proper food storage is now a regulation that protects both humans and bears. Separating bears from human food has begun the process of returning them to a natural state. Animal predators preying on herds of sheep have been hunted almost to extinction, but they too play a critical role in nature. The coyote, whose voice is an echo of the once Wild West, is a vital part of the ecosystem. Cougars, or mountain lions, are constantly on the move. Following herds of deer over many square miles, they are rarely seen. In Piney Nook, rock-sheltered cranny, along a rippling stream, there are places of silence, islands of repose only minutes away from the mainstream. A grassy, river-threaded landscape where many a haven restores the weariest soul. And solitude in snow-shrouded forest along hundreds of miles of trail. Walkers and backpackers learn the feeling of space and the infinite richness of the earth. Hidden Yosemite is never very far away. In the beginning, the American wilderness was of greater aesthetic attraction to European visitors or to those who read about it rather than those who coped with it. By the early 19th century, the wild aspect of the country began to take on national and spiritual meaning for the inhabitants themselves. In this changing attitude, the painters played a major part. Several of these artists, such as Thomas Moran, made significant contribution to the national park movement. Thomas Ayers, a pioneer California artist, was the first to portray Yosemite Valley in 1855. His sketches became widely known in the East. William Hahn portrayed Glacier Point in 1874. By mid-century, differing concerns of science, religion, and art came to focus on landscape, and the natural environment became a major symbol for modern man. The result was an unprecedented sponsorship for art in America, encouraging a school for landscape painting. Albert Bierstadt was America's premier 19th century nature painter. In 1864, he and landscape painter Thomas Hill advised Frederick Law Olmsted, president of the Yosemite Grant Commissioners, on how Yosemite's scenic attractions might be enhanced. The ancient Greek poet Simonides said, "Painting is silent poetry." This, too, was Thomas Hill's definition of painting. He was a versatile and prolific artist. His smaller works are as notable as his epic Western landscapes that link him with Albert Bierstadt and Thomas Moran. The grandeurs of nature and painting were hailed with equal passion. It was at this point that our first national parks were founded. In a sense, the parks were our first massively endowed works of art. Photographer Ansel Adams was another type of artist who perhaps best illuminated Yosemite's beauty. His brush was a camera, his canvas the perfect image for which he was always striving. His artistic work influenced the conservation movement and helped persuade Congress to establish Kings Canyon National Park. For 68 years, his prints mirrored the changing hours and seasons of the landscape he called the environment of majesty. "1900 in Yosemite, the turn of the century, the end of a decade as a national park, the entry of the automobile. For sightseeing guests, a new era of transportation had begun. With the new century came an innovative concept of low-cost accommodations, Camp Curry. Its owners, David and Jenny Curry, welcomed the first guests in June 1899 with beds under canvas roofs and 3 meals a day with clean napkins. The success of the camp was such that in 1925, the National Park Service forced a merger of competing businesses. The outcome was the formation of a single concessionaire under contract to the National Park Service, Yosemite Park and Curry Company. Donald Tressiter, husband of Mary Curry, became its first president. Upon him fell the responsibilities of 2 hotels, 2 lodges, 4 High Sierra camps, and assorted accessory services that served the Yosemite travelers. A railroad to Yosemite's border and stage lines into the valley provided mass transportation and opened the way for sightseers. The increasing numbers of visitors drew a demand for better access to the park and improved roads. In the late 1920s, Yosemite Valley roads were paved with concrete. Traffic struggled up the old Wawona Road until the Bureau of Public Roads constructed the Wawona Tunnel. Progress was slow and difficult around sharp curves. Up it went over 5,500 feet to Inspiration Point. To eliminate the difficulties of this approach, a new road was surveyed, but a cliff of granite blocked the way. The engineer's solution? A tunnel. Construction began in November 1930. An electric railroad was used to haul in supplies and carry out rock. The drills used to cut through the granite were tempered at the rate of a mile a day. Crushed rock was used for the new roadbed. The tunnel was completed in 1933. Cut through solid rock, it is 19 feet high, 28 feet wide, and 4,230 feet long. It is ventilated by 3 adits to the face of the cliff. Ventilating fans clear the tunnel of gases. The dangerous old road was replaced by a broad new highway, and traffic began to flow. Automobiles made it possible to see more of the park in less time. Earlier generations traveled the high country by way of the Great Sierra Wagon Road. The High Sierra is a region of rare romance and matchless mountain beauty. The Tioga Road, rebuilt and redesigned at an elevation of almost 10,000 feet, is the highest vehicle pass in California. Prominent dignitaries such as President Franklin D. Roosevelt in July 1938 have been guests of the park. President John F. Kennedy arrived in August 1962. And in spring 1983, England's Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. When horses are found in museums, they will still be man's best friend in Yosemite. Yosemite's rocks and peaks have always proved a challenge. Half Dome's overhanging rock is nearly a mile above Mirror Lake. Climbing is an increasingly popular sport. Today, the vertical world of Yosemite is ascended with improved equipment and a technique developed far beyond the expectations of an earlier age. David Curry re-established the firefall from Glacier Point, a nightly spectacle for visitors. Other activities have entertained Yosemite's visitors. A Wild West pageant recalled the not-too-distant past. A dog sled race across a snowbound landscape. Easter services were observed beside Mirror Lake, a reverential setting. In 1935, California's first organized ski area, Badger Pass, was established. Yosemite Ski School, dating from 1928, was also the first in the state. The year 1927 was filled with excitement. It was the year that Yosemite Park and Curry Company first opened the doors of the new Ahwahnee Hotel to the valley's visitors. Kennyville, an obsolete stables complex, was the site chosen for the hotel. The complex was raised, and on April 1st, 1926, construction was begun. In contrast with Camp Curry, formality and luxury dominated at the new Ahwahnee. Today, it is enjoyed by many valley visitors. The dining room, with a seating capacity of 350, exhibits rustic architecture. Unique Native American ornamentation prevails throughout the hotel. In recognition of its architectural significance, it has been entered on the National Register of Historic Places. The gracious festival of the Ahwahnee Hotel's Bracebridge Dinner upholds the traditions of a late 17th century English Christmas. Washington Irving is recognized as the first of America's great writers. His depiction of celebrations in The Sketchbook, published in 1820, were recreated for the dinner. Irving's deep love of nature and his descriptive sketches seemed to foreordain the choice of Yosemite as the contemporary home of the Bracebridge dinner. Bracebridge Hall typified the English country estate ruled by a squire. Character descriptions in Irving's Bracebridge Hall collection formed the basis for those appearing in the pageant. A jester, or lord of misrule, was the leader of revelries, a mock king presiding over the festivities. The warmth and joy of voices were raised in song, in praise of Christmas and of the feast itself. The keynote to the success of the Christmas feast was the profusion of foods, each with its own legend, each course an elaborate presentation. The Bracebridge dinner, like the long-ago traditions it portrays, has itself become a tradition in Yosemite. In 1876, from the smoldering ashes of makeshift pioneer structures, rose the New England-style building that was known as the grandest hotel in the mountains of California. The Wawona Hotel, under Curry Company management since 1932, takes its name from the Indian word meaning big tree. The Curry family tenure ended with the death of Mary Curry Tressiter in 1970. 3 years later, the company was purchased from interim stockholders by MCA. Under the successful leadership of President Edward C. Hardy, the Yosemite Park and Curry Company has retained its historic name, as well as the strong commitment to service and hospitality that was the hallmark of Jenny and David Curry.
The number 100 usually indicates something special or noteworthy, particularly when it denotes age. Certainly that's true of Yosemite National Park. The centennial of Yosemite National Park certainly provides us an opportunity to celebrate its past. But perhaps more important than celebrating the past, we should reflect on the past and to use the experience that we've gained to look to the future with insight and with vision. What does Yosemite National Park mean today, and what can it mean in the future? Yosemite is also a preserve of biological diversity. It provides us the opportunity for research. It provides us the opportunity for learning. It's a benchmark of environmental quality, a model, a barometer of global change. Certainly in using Yosemite, we need to remember to treat it gently, because without doing that, we're going to lose the qualities that make this place special and that warranted its protection in 1890. What can we do to help ensure its preservation? We can use it in ways that are appropriate and that impose minimal impact on the resources that this park was established to preserve. At the same time, we can become activists. We can assure that our voices are heard not only in the future management of Yosemite, but at the same time in adopting forms of behavior that will ensure less impact on the resources of this globe. Because as those resources diminish, they're going to have impacts not only on our lives, but on national parks as well. And certainly, we can learn to care. By caring and by loving, we can help assure the future preservation of Yosemite. What will the next 100 years bring? We can't really predict that, but the choices that we make now, the decisions that we make now will help to determine the destiny of this park 100 years from now.
The great American outdoors is an important part of our spiritual heritage. More and more people turn their faces to the woods and the mountains. It must be reserved as the special reward to our great-great-grandchildren who will see it as John Muir once saw it. Yosemite Park is a place of rest, a refuge from the roar and dust and weary, nervous, wasting work of the lowlands. This one noble park is big enough and rich enough for a whole life of study and aesthetic enjoyment. It is good for everybody, no matter how benumbed with care. Its natural beauty cleanses and warms like fire, and you will be willing to stay forever.